See Matt, I see you there, and Lawrence. Thought I saw. Oh, there you are. Okay, great. So I just want to make sure all three jurors, can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. Okay, good. All right. So the first question for the three of you that I think a lot of us are curious about is how did you choose the artists that were ultimately selected for this exhibition? And you might start with instead, how did you choose the pieces that were selected? But how did you choose, I guess?
I'm happy to kick us off. And also thank you for having us. Thank you for doing this. It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure to work with the museum. And also with you artists who submitted your work for selection. It's been a pleasure because partially the quality of the work, but also to the community of the work. So I'm sure we'll get into that. But I'm happy to kick us off and just say a little bit about the rubric that we all use. So individually, because we come from very different backgrounds and work in different sectors right now, I think we each had our own special way of tackling this and discerning in the end what we felt strongly about, what we knew we were in agreement on, and then things that we didn't always line up on. But we had a few categories that we all scored under. One was metal and metal processes. So is it metal? Which is an expansive question, right? You could offer a few different answers to that. The clarity of concept, the creativity and originality, the quality of the composition, the quality of the technical aspects of it, and sort of our overall impression. So we did have a consistent means by which we were measuring some things, even though I'm sure there's quite a bit of variability in what really affected any one of us. So I'll pass it on to any of my fellow jurors to add any more to that you'd like to.
I guess I'll go. Yeah, for me, when speaking about different backgrounds and stuff like that, I'm primarily from studio arts, but then painting and then music and filmmaking background. That's kind of like how I've been spending a lot of my energy as of late. And so for me, like I don't consider myself a sculptor per se, but I've worked in like making installation-based work. So for me, there wasn't so much like familiarity coming into the things and maybe knowing some of the language and different things that is necessary to like quote unquote probably like juror some work, I guess. But for me, again, I spoke on the rubric of the things, but then also for me, when I was looking through the things, I just kind of want to have like a very like flat kind of like objective kind of like, I want to make myself as objective as possible. And so like the way that I kind of viewed everything was just like, how does this make me feel when I see it? Like, and that was kind of my starting point, and then kind of picking pieces that I really, really enjoyed from that space, and then going back and then going through the rubric and looking through the things and like fine tooth combing kind of how I view the work on my end. And that kind of was how I came up with my scores and what I sent in to everybody else. But it really started with just like, how does this make me feel? Like, do I really enjoy this from, not even knowing who did this, not knowing the artist statement and all these other things? Is this hitting me? Then I went back and started to like kind of read through and like, detail everything. So that was kind of my little unique experience with everything. So yeah.
And I guess I can follow up with the second part of that step, because after we individually juried, also, I mean, there was a process in it, I guess, because I'm more heavily entrenched in the jewelry realm of notating if I knew the work in person, or removing myself if I knew a certain maker. But then after the three of us individually scored, they were averaged, and I don't think we even saw each other's individual scores. And we just saw what it averaged as. And then we walked through those, but also if one of us had like a really high score and other people didn't, we also took the chance to go back and discuss it and see it, because the three of us having such varied backgrounds and different perspectives was really extremely productive. To see work in very different ways and talking about like, what is the role of the writing in an application or the quality of an image? And maybe we all like one work in a series, but maybe not the rest of them don't seem to fit. And so it was a really amazing process, because I think we met several times to kind of comb through after we narrowed it down.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful even to me to hear it from the three of you. And a follow-up to this, a kind of natural next step would be the question about the juror's choice. So how did you decide which pieces would receive that recognition?
I don't know. It was yeah.
This was so that y'all, this is one of those things where sometimes in shows everything's sort of prescribed and you like follow a script where you're like, and then we're gonna do the juror's choice thing because it's the thing you do. And we got to this point where I think honestly I'm gonna lob this over to you, Matt. We were like, what is the point of a juror's choice award in this moment? Like, what would we be selecting? Why would it even matter to the artists? And I think that might have been our primary question initially. It was like, well, what's the point of a juror's choice award in this moment in this show? And not to put you on the spot, Matt, but I think you articulated it fairly well in an email. Just like, so if you want to add that, I'll say it. But I want y'all to know that this was kind of, as we met, a bit iterative. Like we talked about it first and then we were like, oh yeah, let's think through this, let's do some scoring, and then we thought through it again. But yeah, I want to kick it over to you, Matt, if you wanted to add any of the things that you said in that email.
Sure. I don't know how poetic I can be not remembering that email, but I think there was just a lot of productive conversation about ways to represent ourselves individually as jurors as well as a collective whole. And also, like, that's the reason why there was, like, if someone felt really strongly and the other two didn't, like, that rehashing to really get a variation and collectively come to decisions. And I think the juror's choice was also a way for us to reflect our personal ideas and to share those. I think we did that in many ways and behind the scenes. And I think that the juror's choice was one of those reasons. I don't know if you want to add to that, Lawrence, or if we should pick apart the exact piece we chose and people want to know. I don't know if it's part of the question.
Kind of, hop into that route a little bit, but kind of because it piggybacks off of what you just said about like our individualistic kind of tastes and like history and backgrounds with art and with sculptural work. And so for me, like I ended up picking Hannah's piece, and it's like it has this royal blue thing going on, which I really responded to. It spoke to me a certain type of way. And I just really, really enjoyed it. And it was one of the pieces that was always kind of on my mind as we were going through this process. And, color has a lot to do with that. Again, being, I have a painting background. So some of the pieces I ended up responding to the most had different color elements to it, just based on my own, again, background and how, in university or whatever, like when I was in undergrad, and took sculpture classes and stuff like that, I didn't see a lot of color, whether it was physical people or the work itself. And so something that kind of popped out to me was that. And so that was something I wanted to highlight, was this piece that I kept thinking about, kept spending time with, was, really loved the color, really loved the shape, really loved the design. And it just made me ask questions of myself, And that was kind of how I went through it. And so I'm sure y'all have similar or varying reasons for why y'all picked the things y'all picked, for sure. So.
Yeah, I picked Funlola's work for a couple different reasons. I guess also as a trained craft historiographer, it fell into a canon that I'm really intrigued by. Like Lisa Jarrett has this amazing piece called Wrecking Ball, and it's just a ball of her hair under glass. And Sonia Clark, and it just follows a thread that it exists in metals, but I haven't seen it as predominantly pushed forward. And also it kind of addresses what we do, as I see in the metals world, of seeing younger makers wanting to make small metals objects that aren't jewelry. And what do we do with those things? There's this active conversation in gallery systems of like, is it a sculpture, but it's a tiny sculpture? And so it has this really, so sometimes we have tiny sculpture shows, but it's really kind of has its own space and it's often easily dismissed. And I think that as hand objects as well, it shows the power that can be in that intimacy that doesn't necessarily need to be wearable. and how that can actually create an impact. So that those were like two very primary reasons why I picked Funlola's work.
I had a handful of choices that I wanted to pick everybody actually. But going into this and sort of speaking to what you were saying, Lawrence, about what spoke to me, I think the question I had coming into being a juror for this show was I was just curious how we were going to see embodiment, how we were going to see autobiography, and how we were going to see those things show up, and if it was going to feel balanced, if it was going to feel excessive. It was sort of the main curiosity I had around, like, what does a show about metals and 2S LGBTQIA plus experience look like? What does it feel like? And those were the two big things that I realized I was kind of packing around with me as we looked at things. And so Danielle Shum's scoliosis was what answered that question for me. And a lot of the pieces did, but in particular, I felt like this appealed to my sense of architecture. I have done a lot of functional metalwork, large scale steel sculpture, and building facades, and there was an architecture to it that immediately sort of spoke my language, but in a very small way that felt holdable and consumable. And then that very honest autobiographical bit of it that didn't feel performative, it didn't feel inauthentic, but it did feel approachable, still vulnerable, and also allowed me to feel embodied. So it wasn't so heavy-handed that I was trying to step into someone else's experience and not being able to really access any sort of meaning while I was there, but approachable in a way that I was like, oh yes, I'm a physical being looking at this, and able to stay in that place where I could be really present with it. So this piece in particular answered a couple questions for me about how were we going to see autobiography and how were we going to see embodiment.
Thank y'all so much. There's just it's so wonderful to hear your perspectives, and I think I can humbly say this because I stepped into my current role as the exhibition was being installed, so like hands off, but it's really been incredibly well received, and it's getting national attention. But even just like Josie and I walking through the gallery spaces, we've seen people react in person. And something you said, Matt, about like individual and shared reactions is just like almost tangible in this exhibition as you watch people react to the objects. So, and I guess this isn't really a segue, but it kind of picks up on what you were just saying, Al. The next question we had for you is, why is this exhibition important for queer communities and metal communities? In my head, I kind of think of these as two like very loose circles that overlap in like a amoeba Venn diagram sort of situation. But I really do believe that this exhibition is significant. And for you three, why is it so significant?
I'll start again. I have a ready answer for this because I've been thinking about just the word community and communities. I mean, metal community is neither monolithic nor, well, I don't know, there are metal communities and metal community, as just like there are LGBTQIA plus community and communities. And I feel like right now, any possible way we can have connection, relationship, and conversation as queer community is a way we ought to. I think we're in a political landscape, in a social landscape, and just in general in any landscape that if and when we can talk to one another, we ought to. I think connection is survival, and unfortunately, survival is the name of the game right now. Fortunately, we have means like this to connect, and we have means like this to tell story and amplify one another's stories. Even when it's not autobiographical, our voices are in them. And so I think having a show with identity as one of the major components is necessary. And I also feel like we're in a space where community has shifted in meaning and how it shows up since the dawn of the pandemic, and in particular metals communities, where proximity has been important. Like we share resources, we share studios, we share the means of producing, and that has been really difficult. And so I think it feels powerful to both have voice in a political and historical moment where we absolutely need it for survival, and also in a moment where proximity has been hard, just logistics have been hard. And so it feels celebratory and in some ways triumphant to have a metals community and LGBTQIA plus community in the same room, for those reasons.
Yes, to all of that. I couldn't say it better. Thank you, Al. And I think that's also what made it super hard to jury, right? Like we wanted to just include everybody. Just to add on that, because I don't need to repeat it again, but I also think that queerness in the kind of aesthetic art world in general is getting to be a very overly used term of queering something or not really relating it to an identity politics. So I think that was really important that the show was grounded as it being part of identity. And so what that allowed was the work didn't have to be about identity. And so it gives a chance for people seeing the show or looking at the images to understand that, yes, it can be about that. It can be very in your face and blunt, and it should be. But it also doesn't have to be, and it should also not be, because it could just be somebody's identity that makes something else that doesn't even look remotely like that person is queer. And I think for viewers, that's what's really important to understand, is that queerness is only a facet of who we are as people, and we can express that in different ways through the way we present ourselves to the world and how we present our work and what we choose to make. So I think that that is the kind of amazing crux of the whole show, is it's an opportunity to see kind of this more vast indexical idea of what does it mean to be a queer metalsmith.
I agree with both of y'all. That was all beautiful. I'm sorry, my response is not going to be as focused and articulate, because I think this show found me in a space where, and like you spoke to 2020, where like we were kind of placed in this isolation, or obviously like very obviously placed in this isolation, and having to face certain truths about our realities and our lives and how we showed up in the world. And so this is like a little personal aside for me. Like I didn't really I mean, I had been existing as who I was, but I didn't really like come out in theory until around 2020, 2021 for me. And so when we talk about like community and stuff like that, I never really existed within one. Maybe, you know, as a Black person, like that's a default thing, but even that is kind of challenging for me because of the way that religion and different things kind of show up in Black communities, and that kind of makes it a lot harder for Black folks to navigate who they are if they show up in any other way. And so I'm kind of coming from this place of like isolation, and then like coming into this show, and then like that expanded my notion of community in a way to where it's like, you know, I had never even maybe thought about what is it to represent one's, you know, identity or personhood through, I don't know, non-photographic, non-painting, non-musical kind of means. And so for me, a lot of this was like a learning thing too. And again, like, you know, playing on my own isolation and my own kind of separation, and like having to navigate my identity kind of a certain type of way. It wasn't always expressive. It wasn't always free. And so to see people telling their stories or just representing who they are in their artwork was not only like inspiring to me, but also like, again, just kind of a way of finding said community, right? Because I think in the painting world, especially right now, Black queer portraiture is like the biggest thing in the world, but at the same time, it's being heavily commodified and kind of pimped out in a way that can be a little, interesting to navigate as a Black queer person who hasn't necessarily made a lot of work about oneself in that way. And so for me, the show, was again a lot of learning experience, a lot of teaching, a lot of like finding a community that I didn't know exist, right? So didn't know existed. I mean, obviously we know that queer people make metal work and make work in all facets of life, but like to kind of have it focused and locked in, not only, for the artist, I'm sure was a certain type of experience, but for me as a juror, it was a certain type of experience coming out of the isolation that was, 2020. And then the isolation for me, that was, it obviously continued into 2021, but then also dealing with my own personal isolation from coming out, and that shifting your social dynamics, that shifting your family dynamics, that shifting the way that you want to tell your story through the arts. It was very nice to be present in this space. And I think for me, I haven't always had so much to say in all of this, because I have been sitting back and like observing and taking in information and learning and growing in confidence. And that has been through this exhibition and through this work. And so I appreciate, obviously, Matt and Al, but also all of the artists and their work in the Metal Museum for like even thinking to have this be a thing, because it has been helpful in more ways than maybe folks even thought about. So yeah, that's my little rambling.
And I'm just going to add like a little bit in there too. Like, thank you, Al. It was super amazing to jury. Lawrence and Al, super amazing to jury with you both. And beautifully put. Also, like, thank you to the museum too. It also offered a chance for us to talk about the structures of the exhibition system itself, and what does it mean, and what are the processes. And also thank you for bringing in 3 people from the community to actually jury the show.
Yeah, on that note, I just have to say, like, it is just it is a breath of fresh air and a drink of cool water to get to talk to queer folks about anything. I mean, I can't tell you how often I will go somewhere and talk about either my work, someone else's work, or community organizing that I've done, and then mention that, oh yeah, I've done some welding or something, and somebody says, oh yeah, I know a lady welder who and I'm like, come on, please, can I just and so just to be in conversation with one another, and the artists who are here, I think that's part of the privilege of getting to review your work, is that even though the conversation was a one-way street while we were reviewing your work, it just feels so good to hear you and to see you. And I think that's part of what feels so poignant about just the name of the exhibition, We Are Here, is I think sometimes people forget that it is still so powerful to know that we are here because of everything we have to swallow every day, from our different experiences and vantage points. So yeah, from that perspective, it feels so valuable and helpful and wonderful.
Well, thanks. And I don't mean this in a flippant way, but it is a nice time to say a little Olive Garden joke: when you're here, your family. But I really mean it, because this is, to me, the starting point of something that's only growing. And I appreciate the work that people have shared, the thought that the jurors have put into this exhibition. And, one thing that I keep kind of mulling over is like, okay, great, what's next? So don't be afraid to reach out to me, to have that conversation. Like, I sincerely want to keep moving forward with the next iteration what this could be and how we can be supportive of that. We do have one more question for the jurors. So, and this one is very practical. From your experiences with this exhibition, what advice would you give to artists as they prepare to apply to other juried shows? Do you have any advice on how to prepare a submission statement or an essay accompanying your work?
I can start to tackle that, I guess. I think Al actually already touched on it, talking about the work that they chose and the idea that the work kind of speaks to you. So as someone who also predominantly teaches writing now, try to avoid telling us or the person reading it what your work is about. To me, that's what an art historian does. A lot of us were trained by art historians how to write, and my whole thing in life now is I think that that's a problem. Instead, give us tools to see the work, give us tools to feel the work, sing songs, read poetry, write a movie script, if it suits your work. That kind of rigid rubric, like don't Google how to write an artist statement. Thank you, 1990s, for that. But I think that that's the best idea, is when you didactically say my work is this, if they don't see that in the work, it's easier to dismiss it. And so when you're interested in an area of thought or thinking or trying to convey ideas of, it opens it up for the person to sit some time with that work to see if they can see that, rather than directly kind of trying to pin it down precisely what it is, because that's what it is for you. But after it's in the world, it becomes something else. So ask your friends, ask colleagues, have crit groups, build a vocabulary. But I think that that's the most important thing, because if you sever that all off, if it's not immediately gotten, it's so much easier to move on to the next application.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm not adding to anything. There you go.
I was one of those art historians. I'm a recovered art historian.
I mean, I was like, I don't know what to do.
I am one too.
So, but the big thing, gosh, that I noticed, and even as I was going back and reviewing some things, is like tell the truth. Just really try to tell the truth. Like what Matt was saying, I think is essentially that. But gosh, and I always try not to say what not to do. But here's something that I catch myself having to stop and say, am I doing this thing? And it's try not to use your artist statement or your essay on your work or whatever to give yourself legitimacy by using jargony stuff or make like big grandiose statements about the state of the world, right? Like your legitimacy is going to come from your work, not your artist statement. And if people don't find your legitimacy in either, then you're barking up the wrong tree anyway, right? Then their eyes are not the ones that are going to see you. So ask yourself if the words you're using or the content of your statements are coming from a place of insecurity or a need to prove yourself, because if they are, use them somewhere else. I think one really helpful, just like a technical thing to do, is get clarity on how whatever you're sending, whether it's supplemental material, your CV, how is it going to be used? So if it's not abundantly clear from the call or the organizing committee, whatever, what the use for your artist statement is going to be, find out from them. Reach out and say, is this going to be supplied to the jurors, the selection committee? Is this going to be used in print? Find out, and then give them something that fits the bill. So give them something that is appropriate for that use. Because if you find yourself sitting back and being like, I don't actually know the purpose of this, then you're going to give them something that doesn't turn out to be that purposeful, right? Like it might not be appropriate for use. So from a technical aspect, like review how it's going to be used and then send something that is appropriate for that. And then just, like I said, tell the truth. And I think that's where you can develop a self-awareness about your work like Matt was saying, get people to review stuff and say, oh, I didn't get that, or I did get that. But showing people a self-awareness and intention. So even if stuff is happening in your work that is unintentional, maybe there are things about you that are revealing themselves over time. You're like, oh, I didn't realize I did that, but look at that. Having some level of self-awareness around that, I think goes a long way.
And I was the little part that I had is like what you're saying is kind of like, it's just like being honest. Like you just have to be honest. But then even that's like a tricky statement, because like we lie to ourselves, and like our ego informs us these things. And so then it translates to, you have to remove your ego from your work. And as artists, I found that it's very hard for a lot of artists to do. And so in that space, when you are trying to, be honest, like, yeah, you have to remove your ego. You have to like be true about who you are and how you show up in the world and what you're attempting to do. Because a lot of times when you make things, we don't always knock it out the park every time, but we're trying to do something. And I think just being honest in that process like goes a long way and like helps you sleep at night, because you're trying to do this thing and we don't always succeed, but it's the point like that we're trying to do this. And so, yeah, that's kind of how I show up. Again, everything I make doesn't do what I wanted to do, but I'm trying to express something and tell something. And that's me putting my best foot forward. And if 6 months down the line, I go, oof, I completely missed the mark on that one. Take notes, you look in the mirror, you be honest with yourself, and then you move on and you try to improve. And so, yeah, that honesty is absolutely necessary to, reach whatever goals you're trying to reach in this thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would almost say if you're not going oof, maybe you should try harder to go oof after a while. And then the other thing I would just add is, we have each other. We're showing this now. I tell people all the time, steal people's CVs, look at artists who are making kind of similar work or work that you kind of want to head in that direction, and look at the shows they've applied for or the spaces that they've been in, and follow those spaces and those galleries. Because cold calling galleries and spaces is really hard to do. But if you pay attention to them and you show up to things and invest in them, you're likely going to get investment back. And also you can ask other artists, like, how was that show? Because sometimes, as we've seen, you have to pay to play and it's a scam. And so there's nothing wrong. You're just maybe won't get an email back. Or if someone's like, no, I don't want to talk to you, then, you don't want to talk to them either then at that point. But I intentionally put my CV up, and a lot of artists do now, in full, so you can see like someone who's really major, not me, but someone who's really far ahead in their career. You can see where they started and what shows they actually got into, or the spaces or the gallerists, the curators that are interested in that kind of work. And save yourself the time. Don't just throw something at every possible show, especially as we have to start paying for a lot of these applications. You'll go broke.
Thank you guys so much. That's really, I would think, helpful for people as they're continuing to kind of build that career, take that next step. So thank you. Now, Josie and I were going to transition over to the artist portion of this panel. And do you have the next start? Okay, I'll let you. Okay. Yeah.
Next. So we just have everyone's slides of who is at the Zoom panel today and just a picture of their work. And if you could spend at most maybe 5 minutes just talking about the work or yourself or whatever you want to talk about for 5 minutes. We have 11 artists here. So once we work through all of you guys, whatever time we have left will be for questions. So if you have any questions, definitely put them in the chat. And if we get time, we will go through those. So first we have Danielle.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. My name is Danielle Shum. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm an undergraduate student at Indiana University. I'm entering my third and final year and will graduate next spring with a BFA in metalsmithing and jewelry design. So metalsmithing and enamel have been an ideal medium for me to explore personal narratives and inspirations from which I often draw from nature and cultural experiences. I was born in Malaysia to Chinese parents, and when I was 5 years old, we moved to the United States. My work often talks about the struggles of being an Asian American and the feelings of not belonging to a community. So inevitably, this investigation on feelings of poorness led to my work last semester, which focused on identity and body dysmorphia, which is the feeling of discomfort within one's own body. So too often I feel like a stranger in my body, and I felt the urge to explore the source of this dysmorphia. So I examined one of the biggest insecurities I have, which is my scoliosis. And scoliosis is the abnormal curve of the spine and is not always visible from first glance. I've struggled with managing it since my early teens, and it has impacted my physical abilities, self-esteem, and body image. The brooch I created features cloisonné wire in the shape of my back. I use enamel to depict the fragility of body image and self-esteem. And I ultimately wanted to create something beautiful out of a condition I've struggled with and a deformity that I hardly talk about or try to ignore and hide. So my metalwork has transformed my scoliosis from a source of body dysmorphia into a symbol of acceptance and vulnerability. When I learned that my brooch scoliosis was going to be featured in the We Are Here exhibition, I was stunned and awed. I've grown up in a culture that asks me to hide my personal feelings and emotions, let alone talking about queer identities in fear of judgment and being seen or treated differently than the person I've always been. I've learned along the way, however, that to be vulnerable is to be strong. I can't express enough thanks to the Metals Museum and the jurors and artists for We Are Here for this incredible opportunity to celebrate the narrative of queer voices in contemporary metals. I also have to say thank you to my teachers and peers in the IU Metals program, my friends who have supported my art and encouraged me to keep exploring ideas in the studio, even when I'm full of doubt and uncertainty. Speaking about craft as a queer Asian American gives me the chance to honor diversity in a dedicated space. Celebrating queer voices in the metals community encourages recognition and strength, despite historical and present-day attempts to silence our voices. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for joining me on a journey on vulnerability and acceptance and finding the courage to not just be yourself, but to love yourself unconditionally. Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. Next, we have Hannah.
Hi, everybody. My name is Hannah Reynoso Tucson. I am from Denton, Texas. I'll be relocating at the end of the month to join the fall semester at UGA in Athens, Georgia. And I'll be doing metalwork and jewelry there as well. So this specific piece doesn't have to do a whole lot with my identity. It really has more to do with like my experiences with my partner. My partner and I, we love vintage stuff. So we're often kind of like on the weekends antiquing or garage sailing. And this necklace kind of was invented from finding one of those pieces at an estate sale. So I'm kind of interested in what is the forgotten mementos that people carry around with us. Maybe you go on a trip or something and you collect a rock or something and put it in your pocket. And maybe you have a stash of them at home. If that sounds like you, I'm specifically talking about that. When we go to estates, I often find like in the back or in someone's like beach themed bathroom, a ton of old crusty kind of like starfish or seashells that end up getting like trashed or thrown out or seen as just clutter or something. But they were once so important to someone that they kept them for their entire life. So at the end of these estate sales, it makes me sad sometimes when I see these things just left behind because they were once, you know, holding on to this intimate moment that someone had carried their whole life. So for this necklace, I was out estate sailing with my partner one weekend, and I found this beautiful starfish that I decided to electroform. So I used the electroforming process to get that starfish in copper. And then the way that I constructed the necklace was with these hammered textured copper plates that were enameled, and then I used blue fishing line to construct the chain along it. So it has a little bit of flexibility. But I'd like to think that, you know, as the viewer, when they go in together, they can like look at this and think of maybe like what kind of life or what kind of memory that this starfish once had. I'm kind of like hopefully bringing a new life to it. The color of the necklace too was chosen because I love color theory, and sometimes using these colors that are they call them like vibrating colors when you put two high contrast colors next to each other. But I think sometimes this specific blue can be so interesting to the eye. It almost looks like it's moving or something. So that's also where I got the color and the design for this necklace. And that's kind of all that I had prepared for today. So thank you all so much for listening.
Perfect. Thank you, Hannah. Next, we have Sulo.
Hello, everybody. My name is Sulo. My pronouns are they, them. I am a recent graduate of SUNY New Paltz MFA program, and I'm currently transitioning to building a home studio and continuing my practice. I just want to give a quick thank you to the Metals Museum and to the Jurors for making such a wonderful exhibition, and I'll move on to talking about the work. These two pieces are from my MFA body of work called Sparkle Filth Cloud 9, Queerness of the In-Between. And while making this work, I was really thinking about making a space, like that space between myself and contemporary society as a trans non-binary individual, and kind of creating a place to understand my own identity. And a lot of my work in my MFA and also the work that I'm currently developing is kind of sort of like a communication waypoint between myself and others. And so the materials and the processes I choose in a way articulate the specificities of my identity and things that I feel that are non-communicable. And so I see my work as the purest form of me that exists in this world, and this object can exist and people can see this, and we can communicate between myself and the viewer can sort of communicate between each other with this work. And so the processes I used in this, I also used electroforming and the big kind of pendant-like forms. I poured gigantic slabs of wax, and I would blind contour draw action figures, flowers that I saw on my walk. And so kind of whatever was in my studio at the time, like the Kitty Boom Boom piece that is like Hello Kitty mixed with some weird mushrooms and other things. And so a lot of this world building happening. And so, yeah, that's kind of sort of a quick little synopsis about the work. And yet, like I said, my approach and to queerness and how I define queerness is woven into the materials I choose and the techniques and the colors that I choose. And yeah, so it's about communicating the non-communicable and creating Sparkle Filth Cloud 9 in this world, and a place where I sort of can break myself and put myself back together again, and making things that are equal parts sparkle and filth. And that's what you see here. And yeah, so thank you so much for having my work in the show again. And yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, Sulo. Corey actually is sick, so they are not making it here today. So we will go on to Joy.
Hi, everyone. My name's Joy, she, her, and I'm located in Southern California in Chumash and Hashiman traditional territory. This piece is part of my MFA project as well. I graduated in 2022, and I'm working more into work like this. This piece actually has a I play with the names of my pieces a lot with my work, and this piece has a longer sort of subtitle, if you will, and see if I can remember it, because sometimes I change them. But I believe it's chair, ellipses, sit up straight, place your arms on the metal and your feet on the ground. Survey the world around you and know that it is yours. And I've
That's correct. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I forgot with the extended one, but you are exactly correct. Sorry.
Okay. No, it's not a problem at all. It's very silly and long. And that's indicative kind of the length of the title is how I experience the process of making my work is very embodied. I'm a blacksmith. This is a full-size chair. You know, you can sit in it. And I love the process of blacksmithing. I love the physicality of it. It is a time when I feel very comfortable in my body, and it's the most meditative thing. It's the best thing that anyone could do. If you get a chance to try blacksmithing, you should try it. And I want to, or I hope to somehow try to communicate some of that, or provide the opportunity for some of that to an audience or a viewer, an experiencer, sometimes I talk about in my work. So I hope that someone might come to that and kind of have an experience in their own body, a physical and embodied experience, rather than simply a mental engagement with the work. And blacksmithing lends itself to that because of the texture of the metal. It's very, I feel, very personal, because it's my direct labor directly impacts the work. Every movement of my arm, you see a result of in there. So it's a very personal kind of communicative interaction, I feel. I emphasize that also. You can see in the left picture, the joinery of it, and there's bronze brazing rod. I'm a welder professionally as well, so I like to play with some of these processes. It's a little bit, the process I'm doing is not correct according to kind of the industrial way it's supposed to be. And that's a bit fun and funny to me. So I'm using it for joinery, but also as a decorative element. And I really enjoy that. And I think that it emphasizes, again, the physicality, the texture, the interpersonality of it. And other works in this series, I'm working in furniture and wanting to create, again, this sort of a physical experience in the viewer. And this one specifically, I submitted to this show because of the empowerment I noticed. Again, I feel very empowered in the process of making, but also sitting in this work, once I make my work, I then, I am also the sort of interpreter of it, the experiencer of it myself. And sitting in this chair felt very empowering. It's very throne-like, it's very upright. So the sort of place your arms on the metal, your feet on the ground, has a very grounding effect, at least in my experience of it. And that's why I titled it that way, to communicate that to the viewer. And I submitted it to this show because I think that is how I experience my queerness, is a very internal thing. And it's a very self-empowering. My own, again, experience is not that I necessarily have to communicate it all the time to everybody. So this chair is a chair, it doesn't, like the jurors were talking about, necessarily reflect queerness in an obvious way, but it's my very existence is queerness, and the existence of this chair in the same way is its chairness, if you will. So those things are not divorceable, not separable from each other. And it's a very simple object that we encounter in the everyday, but it's sort of an opportunity to pay more closer attention. And the way that we pay closer attention to ourselves and our identities is, I think, a source of empowerment. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy. Sorry about that again.
Not a problem at all.
Okay. All right, next we have Jay.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I think I've really appreciated the discussion happening. And Matt mentioned, I believe it was Matt mentioned something about how queerness is only one very small part of who we are as people. And I I think the piece that I made for this kind of tries to encapsulate that a little bit because so I'm a plant person. I have like hundreds of houseplants. They're kind of like my life. Other than jewelry, I have like two things in my life, and it's plants and jewelry. And I've been really feeling inspired to combine those two things recently and try to be like, people are multifaceted, and orchids especially are quite interesting. If you ever get the chance to do more research about like the history of houseplant collecting, it kind of started with orchids, and it all kind of ties into like colonialism and imperialism and lots of different things that on its face you don't necessarily notice. So that the orchid is a symbol also of like female genitalia, or you know, it's got so many things going on. So I also combine some really geometric shapes with it that are traditionally more of like a masculine thing, to kind of combine those two things together in a way that is also wearable, because I really enjoy making wearable things. It's a more I think it's fun. I don't know. That's just me. And yeah, I guess I don't have a whole lot to. It's a pretty straightforward piece. I don't think there's a lot of like hidden layers and meanings, and I'm okay with that. I've been graduated. I went to Colorado State University and have a BFA in metals and jewelry. And as much as I love making really complex, layered, conceptual pieces, I get more joy personally from making things that are aesthetically pleasing, a little bit more like, this is what it is and that's it. You know, it doesn't need to be, and that's just the meaning I get from it. So it's not necessarily like, you know, I'm not dogging on anyone else's game or anything, but you know, I feel really called to just make things that bring people joy, and that also brings me joy. There's a word for that. It's called compersion, and traditionally that word, not traditionally, but that word is used in the polyamorous community a lot, and it may have to do with sex, but for me, I love that word because it is like, joy is contagious, and that's kind of how I feel jewelry should be in this, I guess, state. So I'm also, I don't think that was quite 5 minutes, so you're welcome to ask me questions if necessary.
If no one has one right off the bat, I think we'll have questions at the end.
Okay.
But thank you, Jay.
Yeah, thanks.
Could I ask a quick one? I apologize. I had to set the baby down.
Go for it.
Jay, how did you cast that orchid? That's incredible.
Yeah, so I actually work with someone that specializes in this. They're based out of Grand Junction, which is like pretty far west Colorado. It's basically Utah. And yeah, that is their specialty. And I had them custom cast me this orchid. They do a lot of like pine cones, and they 3D print some of their things too. I have a few cast raven skulls that they 3D printed, but yeah, the orchids they do in gold and silver and bronze. And I'll send their info through the chat because they do really cool stuff. And as a fellow small business, I like to support other small businesses, but I do not have currently the capability to do casting. So that's why I chose to kind of outsource that. However, I did solder to it, and it is solid silver. I mean, the thing is pretty heavy. So yeah, did that answer your question? Sorry.
No, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Sweet.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks.
Now we have Liz.
Hi, my name is Liz. I'm also an MFA student currently at the University of North Texas. I use they, them pronouns. My work kind of revolves around using sustainably sourced specimens, inorganic displays, and permanent casting materials to create contemporary fossil sorts. It really stems from a deep love of ecology, taxidermy, and natural history museums, which have always been my thing since a kid. I take a lot of inspiration from looking at things such as curiosity cabinets and the visual cues of the Enlightenment era and the history of natural history museums, their displays, to kind of push the boundaries between presenting materials in like an informational culture type space, to create sensations and conversations around wonder and curiosity. I specifically use materials such as like glass and ceramic and iron and bronze, to kind of use raw materials from the earth that are then transformed through heat based methods to create these permanent fossils of sorts. I specifically have a huge love in my heart for materials such as iron and bronze, due to the kind of community that's comes from casting these materials, since it's not just a one layer kind of thing. Especially with like things like iron, it almost feels like a ritual of sorts to come together and break down the iron and work through the sand and all of these casting processes and the community that comes from that. But with these displays, I tend to work with materials that come from the southern landscapes, since I am a Texas-based artist, to kind of bring about new conversations with the ecology around us and new associations with them. Like with this specific piece, I was really intrigued by the kind of iconic imagery surrounding goats and the different associations with them, especially being in the South and being a highly religious area. So presenting it in this way that kind of exists as an altar, but not quite. So what is the meaning behind it, and what are the new associations that can be formed with it? But yeah, in relation to the show, I was really excited to kind of explore that idea of being a queer creator, as it's something that's been mentioned by several other people, but it's not necessarily something that's like necessarily apparent in my work, but definitely does affect how I create and the kind of atmosphere around creating, especially as someone who's, I guess, more femme presenting. Like I work at a bronze casting foundry, and anyone who's seen this femme is always given like the light work. But doing things such as like community-based iron pours, I find like there's a lot more equality and everyone's kind of presented equally. And trusted equally with even heavier workloads. And so I've really found myself drawn to that, kind of connecting queerness to things such as iron pours. And I'm very excited to be in the show. And that's all.
Thank you, Liz. Now we have Robert.
Can you hear me? Okay, cool. So I wrote everything down because I'm terrible at talking, but I go by he, him. I got my BFA from Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville in metalsmithing. And then I got my MFA from Edinburgh University in Pennsylvania, which now has a new name. I live in St. Louis, Missouri. This is my studio that I'm in right now. It's in my 100-year-old house, and I enjoy working here. And I teach at Craft Alliance here in St. Louis. But my work's about collecting and highlighting materials from nature. I've been collecting my whole life. A lot of my materials come from my like childhood rock collection, family vacations, travel, and people send me boxes in the mail of materials that made them think of me. I spent a great deal of time growing up kind of on my own. When we'd go on vacation, I'd kind of wander off and collect stuff in the woods, or, you know, we were always kind of poor. So we were going to national parks and doing things that were outside and less like touristy things. The isolation led me to, you know, be introspective and sensitive in the way that I was like thinking about materials. My forms are dictated by the stones and objects I choose, but they're heavily influenced by the majority of, you know, the people that have been part of my life, whether it be like my grandma or mom, sister. My materials range in age from anywhere from a couple million years to, you know, a year or two. It just depends on what I'm using. I like contrasting them. But in this piece that I made for the exhibition, I used clear rock crystal, and I made it, you know, into this form of like a cluster. I made it so that it would amplify the color that is underneath. So whatever it's, you know, if you had it on the wall or whatever you were wearing. The reason why I did this was because I was always told I was too much growing up, and then I needed to like tone it down, or, you know, not be myself and kind of apologize all the time. I'm also from the Midwest, so I say sorry all the time. But as I grew older and meeting other people that were in a similar situation as me, started to make me understand that those differences were what made me special, and I needed to amplify them. So the piece is meant to highlight whatever the person's wearing, and make it even more, bright or apparent. So, and I'd like to thank everybody that was involved with the show. I got to stop by on Thursday. It looked great. So it was really cool to see everybody's pieces in person and see like the scale and the color and everything. So.
Thank you. I'm so glad that you stopped by. Sorry I didn't get a chance to catch you. All right, next we have Wyatt.
Hey everybody, my name is Wyatt NP. I graduated from Tyler School of Art and Architecture in 2021 with a BFA in metals jewelry and CAD/CAM design. Since then, I've worked on mostly my own production pieces and like one-off commission pieces, mainly in the form of champlé enameled belt buckles, such as the piece in this exhibition. So growing up, I've been pretty much obsessed with horses my entire life and agriculture. I've worked with them my entire life, trained them, competed, participated in organizations such as FFA and 4-H. And as a kid, I was so heavily involved in the agricultural community that I really thought I was going to go into that, and then somehow ended up in art school and ended up making a lot of belt buckles. I really, most of my work is just really informed by using color. And I would say that I don't really necessarily make what is considered stereotypical queer work. A lot of my work is just based on my experiences growing up and having been very involved in the ag community as a kid, as a queer kid and a trans kid. It was a very difficult environment, especially when I was showing horses for a living after college. It's definitely an interesting to see more and more queer people getting into farming, getting into horsemanship, and just breaking that barrier and just like getting into and just like involved with working with their hands in a different way than being an artist. But farming is a lot like art, so it's really nice to just have been able to translate that into these wearable pieces. So yeah, thank you so much to everybody in this exhibition and with the Miller Museum and all the other artists. I was really happy to be a part of it.
Thank you, Wyatt. Hosanna.
Unmute myself. Sorry about that. Hi, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm so honored to have a chance to participate in the show. Oh, can you hear me? I didn't do the check. Okay, cool. My name's Hosanna Rubio. I use they, them pronouns. I just recently moved back to my home state of Southern California in the middle of COVID. And I have just been in a state of transition, really, in every sense of the word. And a part of me really felt this intense sense of imposter syndrome. I mean, more than I typically feel in every aspect of my life, but in being in a queer show. Because for me, I've been really open with my friends, but my family, I've only been really openly, fully out as non-binary and queer with them for the last year that I've stopped trying to fit myself into something that I'm not for the happiness of others. And a big part of how I grew up is the reason for that. If you've ever met me in person, you know that I was raised in a fundamentalist Pentecostal environment. And this environment not only ran our church, they ran our school. So it was literally a fire and brimstone, end of the world congregation that was really emphatic that we were living in the end times. So from a very young age, I knew and I was told that something was wrong with me, that the thoughts and impulses and behaviors that I had not only weren't normal, but that they were blasphemous. And so for years, I really tried to make choices that I felt would be passing, from that point of view for these people. And as anyone who's tried that knows, you make some horrible choices trying to make other people happy. And I was in an abusive marriage with a man for 6 years. And just like with the church growing up, I felt like if there were enough time or enough action, enough changes on my part, that I could fix it. That it was not only something that kind of I had deserved and earned, but that I could make it stop if I wanted to. And in the middle of my MFA, he put me in the hospital. And I wanted to just walk away and burn it all down and leave the program. And my professor stopped me and told me to take all that pain and that anger and try to put it into my work. And these are some of the pieces from that. I had always kind of put my experiences with my family and growing up not being feminine enough, not being straight enough, not being, I don't know, the perfect daughter or wife, or I could never fit into those boxes because I wasn't someone who existed in those boxes. But I had always worked at it from kind of a safe place of making it for myself. And these were pieces where I started, as one of my friends put it, it was working from a wound and not a scar. But for me, it was an attempt to make something that took that pain and those anger and the feelings and the experience and made something beautiful that I could put out into the world. And it wasn't necessarily something that I needed people to see what I saw in it, because I had put what I needed to in it. And I really went into a lot of research into things. I'm one of those people that will just drown myself in meaning. From a biblical standpoint, I think it's been trained into me. And the piece on the right is from a series called Boundaries. That piece is called Opening. And it was looking at the idea or almost the promise of violence that I had been living with, and kind of exploring the idea of the body as something that I was trying to work through, because my identity was so scattered and still so hard to form. And I was also looking at this idea of how we explore femininity and masculinity, how we code these objects like steel or glass or china paints, flowers, as either having masculine or feminine identities or characteristics, and how that kind of played out in my work. And I went really deep into the idea of the Victorian flower symbolism, like a lot of little macabre nerds. And the flowers on the piece on the, I don't know my right from my left. Okay, it's the piece on the left, with the red flowers are based on lilies of the valley, which I found out like last month is my mom's birth flower, and it makes so much sense. But they're actually historically kind of codified as symbols of female suffering and masculine potential, which, oof. And so I wanted in these pieces to kind of look at these ideas of dichotomies and balances and push and pull, because that's all my identity had been for me. And I was trying to start with the piece on the left, which is Machine in the Garden, trying to kind of climb over the fences that I had either been put in or let myself build up around myself to try and keep me safe and try and find a way to live and identify myself authentically. And I know for a lot of artists, we look at the studio as this place that can be almost like a bastion or a safe space, and we talk about our work as therapy. And honestly, I don't think it's cheaper than therapy. Like, therapy can be pretty cheap if you're on a sliding scale, but I find it very fulfilling. And I have had a lot of conversations started with other people about what I was going through with my work. That doesn't necessarily carry through in the pieces, but I like the conversation and that fact that there is an intimacy of participation, of how much I share and how much they consume in the imagery of the pieces. I probably talked way more than 5 minutes. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I really appreciate your honesty and openness with us. Thank you. Next, we have Andrew.
Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Thornton. My pronouns are he and him. I'm the co-owner and creative director of Allegory Gallery in lovely Ligonier, Pennsylvania. So I just want to say thank you first for this opportunity. And also, after hearing a lot of the commentary about the pieces, I really feel seen and a part of the community. It's been, I'm over here wiping my face because it's some of the things that have been said have been hit the nerve, so to say. Anyway, so one of the things that Lawrence had mentioned was about sometimes you go into the studio and you don't really know what's going to happen, and sometimes you miss the mark. During the pandemic, I was fortunate enough to have an opportunity to be an artist in residence at Contemporary Craft in Pittsburgh. And I had one of those experiences where I had this intention of creating this body of work, and it didn't quite work out. So I kind of had to take the time to dig deep within myself. And I kind of did an Ellsworth Kelly, where he's kind of known for these big monolithic kind of geometric pieces of artwork. And on the side, he does these self-portraits. And to me, those self-portraits have more meaning and kind of are more evocative to me and what I am interested in. So I started this series of self-portraits, and it's something that I've always done. Wherever I've been kind of stuck on something, I go deep within myself to kind of, see what's what. So this, one of the things that really interested me about making my work, and Matt had kind of mentioned this, is when the work goes out into the world, there isn't necessarily a little card that goes along with it that says this is this and it means this. And so for me, it's really interesting to hear what other people's interpretations are. And I was fortunate enough to speak at the opening of We Are Here, and had a lot of wonderful conversations about what other people thought the work was about. So I thought that was pretty cool. And I heard a lot of really interesting things, and it was kind of cool to see all these different interpretations. But for me, one of the things that I'm kind of interested in with these self-portraits is the ideas of the stories that are told to us and the stories that we tell to each other and to ourselves. And so it kind of is one of those things where there's a lot of different facets, as has been mentioned previously in this conversation, about how queer identity is just one facet of who we are. So a lot of the work which I kind of resonated with were things that were kind of amorphous in that sense. But because we are makers and we are queer, all the work in this show is queer as far as I'm concerned. But anyways, so the piece itself kind of represents the different stories and personas that we show to the world. And this doesn't mean that we're being disingenuous or not wholly and authentically ourselves, but we kind of have to become these certain ideas for certain circumstances. And it's interesting in the queer community, especially with some of the recent things going on, especially with like the Love is Love and marriage equality, there were queer spaces that almost became erased because of this idea of making things more palatable and more presentable to the community en masse. So I do think that there is this idea of having to be a chameleon. And it come from the generation where you had to be a chameleon and you had to wear many different faces so that you didn't experience violence or overt prejudice. So it's one of those things where we all have these different kind of faces that we wear. And I chose specifically the cameos because there is such a tie to what is precious and what is kind of sentimental. And I'm so happy to hear that others in this group are fellow magpies and they're collectors of things, because I am, you can't tell it from this background, but there's a lot of stuff in my house. And those things all make their way into my work. So once again, thank you so much for this opportunity. I really very much appreciate it.
Thank you, Andrew. And last but not least, we have Mallory.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mallory Weston. My pronouns are she, they. Sorry, I'm not sharing my video today. I'm feeling a little bit under the weather, so figured I'd just talk to everybody. But I'm based in Philadelphia, and I'm a teacher at Tyler School of Art and Architecture. That's part of Temple University, and also a member of the JV Collective that's located in Philadelphia. This is a trio of 3 brooches, so they're jewelry scale, and they're made from anodized titanium that's stitched onto fabric. So they're based off of begonia plant patterns, leaf patterns, but they're part of this larger series that I've been working on since about maybe 2019, that is influenced by houseplants. So I started working with imagery that depicts the variegated monstera. And I was initially interested in houseplants, not only because of like their beauty, but also because of, I guess, like the phenomenon of houseplant collecting, which Jay talked a little bit about earlier in their description of their piece. And it is incredibly interesting because of, it's a hobby and an interest that I think appears so innocuous, but there's also this very like complicated past in the history of houseplant collecting. And I think I'm kind of channeling a little bit in that, of that in these pieces that I'm making. So yeah, I think, using anodizing as a method of depicting these flowers really, leaves is really a great way to kind of show the color palette of the leaves and kind of create these like very vibrant pieces. Something else that I'm working a lot with in these pieces is kind of this intersection of like nature and technology. So using this process of anodizing, also a little bit of computer-aided design in the way that I'm generating the templates for these pieces. So this like, yeah, I guess the way that nature and technology kind of imitate and reflect each other. But I feel like I could kind of just talk forever about these pieces. And there's so many things that they can kind of encompass as far as the concept, but I'll kind of leave it right there. And if anybody has questions, I'm happy to answer them later. Thank you everyone so much. And it's really an honor to be a part of this exhibition.
Again, thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'd encourage all of you to come explore the exhibition on your own time. If you've already seen it, I would encourage you to come back. Thank you again to our wonderful jurors, artists, members, and attendees, and have a wonderful Sunday evening.